boys, it's HarmNone. Today we're going to be going over what I feel are 10 of the most underrated cars in Grand Theft Auto Online. Now this isn't necessarily objective fact, this is just cars that I feel like are underrated and deserve a little bit more attention within Grand Theft Auto Online. Now, of course, you guys will know some of these cars, you will not know some of these cars as well, but regardless, I feel like all of these cars deserve a little bit more attention within this game. Anyway guys, we're going to start off with number 10. Alright guys, at number 10 we have the Lampadaddy Felon and the Lampadaddy Felon GT. Now this here is the Lampadaddy Felon. It is of course a 4-door vehicle, so it's a pretty good one for driving around with some friends in. Now this, along with the Felon GT, can be stolen off of the street or purchased from Southern San Andreas Super Autos for $90,000 for the 4-door or $95,000 for the 2-door convertible. Now the Felon is of course also a car that you can steal off of the street for absolutely free, which is exactly how I would recommend acquiring both of them. Now the Felon itself has a decent amount of little customization that you can do to it. It has side skirt options, it has a spoiler option, a hood option, and I believe even a front bumper option if I'm not mistaken. For being a car that you can steal off of the street for free, it has very good performance. This thing is actually ridiculously fast, way faster than you would normally expect. The Felon is always a car that I recommend picking up for new players in Grand Theft Auto Online. A lot of the time, if people are asking me for a good first car to pick up, I will always say the Lampadaddy Felon or the Felon GT. Of course, they are also a pretty good way to make some extra money in Grand Theft Auto Online because the Felon GT sells for $9,500 and this sells for $9,000 if you steal them off of the street and just take them to Los Santos Customs. So both of the Felons are very useful cars, I would say. Whether you're selling them or you want to have one just to drive around, they are good for both of those things. Anyway guys, I think that's pretty much it for the Felon and the Felon GT. Let's move on to number 9. Alright guys, next up at number 9 we have the Ubermacht Oracle. This is another car that you can steal off of the street for absolutely free, or you can buy it from Southern San Andreas Super Autos for $80,000. This is a really solid car for the price and for having the ability to obviously steal it off of the street and put it in your garage for free. The Oracle is another car that I would recommend to new players if you're struggling for money. This thing is very solid. Of course, it is a 4-seater and it's based off of a BMW 5 or a 7 series. There's a bit of debate about that usually in my comments. I personally think it's more of a 5 series, but I can see how it could be a 7 series. Regardless of that though, it is a very sleek looking car, a very good looking car in general. Now the Oracle also has very good performance to back up its very good looks. It is a pretty quick little sedan. The acceleration on this vehicle is pretty darn good and the handling is not bad either. It's actually really good at drifting if you just crank the handbrake. The Oracle is actually pretty solid. It's very surprising. You wouldn't necessarily think of it as being a great drift car, but it kinda is low-key. Overall, the Oracle is definitely a car that I would recommend picking up. It is very solid and you can make it look really sleek. It also has some decent customization that you can do to it as well, which is of course another nice feature. For $80,000 you cannot go wrong with a Ubermacht Oracle. Anyway guys, that is it for number 9. Let's move on to number 8. Alright guys, next up at number 8 we of course have the Obey Tailgater. This car can be had for $55,000 off of Southern San Andreas Super Autos, and yes, it is the car from the campaign. It is Michael's car. It is very good. For $55,000 you get a sedan that is within the top 10 fastest sedans in the entire game. It has very many customization options as well, which is a great feature. Clearly it is pretty darn fast. It handles well, it accelerates well, it has a pretty decent top speed. Overall, the Tailgater is a very solid car, and it is a very underrated one in this game. I never see anybody driving a Tailgater in online these days, and that could be for many different reasons. Probably because it's not the fastest car ever, however, it is still a really cool car in my opinion, and I definitely think that it is underrated and deserves a lot more attention than it gets right now. Anyway guys, I think that's pretty much it for number 8. Let's move on to number 7. Alright guys, next up at number 7 we of course have the Grotty Carbonizer. This is a car that I pretty much swear by in Grand Theft Auto Online. If people are looking for a car for under $200,000, I always recommend the Grotty Carbonizare. I think it's one of the best cheap sports cars that you can get in the entire game, and it's got some pretty cool features. The first of those being, of course, it is a convertible. It also has a little bit of customization that can be done to it to increase its performance, which is kind of cool as well. It has some spoiler options, and it also has some exhaust options. So not the best for customization. The Carbonizare sounds really awesome. It looks really awesome, and it is only ever really driven in GTA Online by NPCs. This is of course one of the cars that you will see roaming around the Rockford Hills area, being driven by AI mostly. The last time that I saw somebody actually driving a Carbonizare must have been about 3 years ago, and since then I haven't seen anybody other than myself driving one. The Carbonizare is definitely a car that I recommend picking up, and for only $195,000 it is a really good car. Now it could be better in a lot of ways, but I do still think that it is very good for the price, and it's definitely an underrated car in this game. Anyway guys, I think that is pretty much it for the Grotty Carbonizare. Pick one of these things up if you don't have one already. It's an awesome car. Anyway guys, let's move on to number 6. Alright guys, next up at number 6 we of course have the Volcar Feijoa. I'm not saying that word because, well, demonetization and canceling and, you know, such. Now this thing is a very underrated car, a very underappreciated car within Grand Theft Auto Online, and definitely a car that I would recommend picking up. This thing costs just under $350,000 in Grand Theft Auto Online, and for that price you do get a really customizable and really cool little car. The Feijoa is definitely a car that I would recommend picking up. Ever since I bought this thing, I have been super impressed with it. It handles well, it accelerates, well, not the best ever, but it's such a cool car, and you never see anybody driving these in online. I spotted this thing on Southern San Andreas Super Autos while I was browsing one day, and I decided to buy it and actually customize it, and I was pleasantly surprised. I think that this is actually one of the coolest cars in all of Grand Theft Auto Online, simply because of the overall look of it, but also the customization features that it has. Overall, it is a car that I would recommend picking up if you guys do not have one already. I kind of go on about this car because I just think it's so good, and I definitely want more people to try it out. It's a very nice little vehicle. Anyway guys, with that being said, let's move on to number 5. Alright guys, next up at number 5 we of course have the Hijack Chameleon. This is probably a car that you guys will not have really seen before in online, but let me tell you, it is a very cool car. It actually has a decent amount of customization features, and the best part about it is that you can buy it for only $100,000, which is a pretty fair price, I must say. Now the Chameleon is a really interesting car because on the back here it says hybrid V12, and it doesn't actually have an engine sound. It only makes an electric sound, which is very interesting. However, of course, you can see on the back it does of course have exhausts. The Chameleon is a little tiny bit weird, but that just makes it a little bit cooler. On the roof as well, you can see there are solar panels to charge the vehicle, I suppose, which is pretty darn cool. I don't know of many cars within this game that have that, if there is any at all other than this thing. So that is a pretty cool feature in my opinion. Of course, like I said, it also has a decent amount of customization that you can do to it, and it's actually pretty fast, especially for only $100,000. The Chameleon is definitely a super underrated car within Grand Theft Auto 5 and Grand Theft Auto 5 Online. I would love for more people to drive this thing. I think it is one of the most underappreciated and underutilized cars in the entire game. It's not the fastest ever, it doesn't handle the best ever, but it is a really cool car. Anyway guys, I think that's pretty much it for number 5. Definitely pick up a Chameleon if you do not have one already. You will not be disappointed. With all that being said, let's move on to number 4. Alright guys, next up at number 4 we have the Grotty Stinger GT. Now this is actually one of the more expensive cars on the entire list, but for the high price you do get a really cool car. Now the Stinger GT is of course in the sports classic category, and it is not one of of the fastest vehicles within that category. However, it is still a very cool vehicle. Now, the Stinger GT is a car that I literally don't think I've ever seen somebody else drive in Grand Theft Auto Online. It is so underrated. Now, I'm pretty sure that the Stinger GT is actually a part of the Vehicle Import-Export DLC. I think that you actually have to steal these quite often, if I remember correctly. However, I could be completely wrong. Now, the Stinger GT's performance is not the greatest ever, like I mentioned before, but it is pretty good for just cruising around in free mode. And if you want to pull up on some people looking really classy, the Stinger GT is a car to pull up in. This thing is really awesome. I would definitely recommend picking one of these things up if you guys have quite a bit of excess money lying around. This thing does cost around $800,000, I believe. It's definitely up there a little bit in price, but it is of course very underrated. Anyway guys, that is pretty much it for the Stinger GT at number 4. Let's move on to number 3. Alright guys, next up at number 3 we have the Benefactor Feltzer. Now this is one of the cars that was on my list for the best cars for under $500,000 within Grand Theft Auto Online, and it is a super underrated car. This thing only costs $145,000, and it is just outside of the top 10 fastest sports cars in the entire game, which is pretty impressive considering that this thing was added to the game all the way back in 2013 when the game first came out. And it is just outside of the top 10 in the sports class racing category in Grand Theft Auto Online. That is really impressive to me. Also, for $145,000, you do get a car that you can customize like crazy. You can make this thing look absolutely insane like mine is right now, or you can make it look pretty tame and pretty normal. The Feltzer also has very good traction, very good handling, decent acceleration, and a pretty good top speed. Although the top speed is really the thing that separates this thing from most of the cars within the top 10 in the sports class, it is still not that bad. Overall, the Feltzer is a super underappreciated car in Grand Theft Auto Online. The only time that you ever see these things driving around is when they're being driven by NPCs on the street, which I think is a real shame considering just how good this car actually is. Overall, I feel like the Feltzer completely deserves to be on this list, and that's why it's here. And that's also why it's so high on the list. Anyway guys, that is it for number 3. Let's move on to number 2. Alright guys, next up at number 2, we of course have the Grotty Cheetah. Yes, I just customized this car yesterday, and the reason I customized it was because this video was coming out today. The Grotty Cheetah is one of the most underappreciated cars these days in all of Grand Theft Auto Online in my opinion, especially considering just how good this thing actually is. If you guys watched my customization and review yesterday, you will know that I was going on and on about this car and just how good it is. And I'm basically going to do the exact same thing in this video. The acceleration of this car is extremely good. The handling is even better than the acceleration. Top speed is a little bit lacking, but what it lacks in top speed is made up for in handling and acceleration, of course. It also has some pretty decent customization options that you can do to it to make this thing a little bit more unique and a little bit your own. Now, when I was customizing it, I also mentioned that the last time I had seen somebody drive this thing was actually me driving it, because I literally do not remember the last time I saw somebody driving a Cheetah in online, even in a race. It has been absolutely forever since I've seen somebody whipping one of these things, and I think that that is such a shame. The Cheetah is a great car, and for only $650,000, I do not think that you can go wrong with this vehicle. It is so good at pretty much everything that it does. It is absolutely an underrated vehicle, and more people should definitely buy this thing. Anyway guys, that is pretty much it for number 2. Let's move on to number 1. Alright guys, next up at number 1, we of course have the Grotty Bestia GTS. I've just sort of realized there's a lot of Grotty cars on this list. That's kind of crazy. And the Bestia GTS is definitely an underrated vehicle. This thing came out with the CEO update, I believe it was. Ever since then, I really haven't seen anybody driving this car, and I can't really figure out why. You may be thinking, especially if you're a bit younger, that the Bestia GTS is absolutely disgustingly ugly. And, well, I can kind of see where you're coming from. However, with time, this vehicle has definitely grown on me. I remember when it first came out, I was like, oh, that thing's kind of cool from the front, and then I saw the back and I was like, I don't know, man. Trust me when I say this, as I have gotten older, I have been appreciating this car more and more. Now, the Bestia GTS is a car that I literally haven't seen since the day when the CEO update dropped in Grand Theft Auto Online, and I think that was around 2016. Now, the Bestia GTS actually has very decent performance. The handling is probably its weakest, but the handling is also really good a lot of the time. The car can be a little bit slippery, but it is very manageable generally. Now, the Bestia has very good acceleration and a pretty decent top speed as well from what I can tell. It definitely takes heavy inspiration from the Ferrari FF in real life, which is a car that basically looks identical to this, except a little bit different, obviously. Now, the Bestia GTS goes for just over $600,000 in Grand Theft Auto Online, which is pretty cheap, I gotta say. And for that price, you do get a really underrated vehicle, and in my opinion, a criminally underrated vehicle. The Bestia GTS is truly an awesome vehicle, and I 100% recommend picking this thing up, especially if you're really into faster hatchback vehicles, because this thing is definitely one of those. Overall, the Bestia is truly a great car. And with that being said, let's move on to the actual #1 most underrated car in all of Grand Theft Auto Online. You already knew this was coming. Of course, the true #1 underrated vehicle in all of Grand Theft Auto Online is the Canon Seminole. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for the Canon Seminole, one of the greatest cars to ever be added into Grand Theft Auto Online, and one of the greatest cars ever that everybody completely overlooks. The Canon Seminole is faster than the Benefactor Krieger. Yes, you heard that right. And this thing costs $30,000, which is about 1% of what the Krieger costs. And for 1% of what the Krieger costs, you get about 300% of the car. As you guys can see, the Canon Seminole is absolutely lightning fast. Sometimes you have to drive this thing slowly just to appreciate the true beauty of the vehicle. It is just such a good looking vehicle. Of course, it also is one of the best sounding cars in the entire game. The Canon Seminole truly is the most underrated vehicle ever to grace Grand Theft Auto 5. Definitely pick up a Canon Seminole. Actually a goated vehicle. Anyway guys, that is pretty much it for the top 10 most underrated cars in Grand Theft Auto Online. Let me know what you thought of my list in the comments down below. Let me know some more underrated cars, and I will definitely make a part 2 to this video. I think this is a really interesting series. Anyway guys, if you enjoyed, a like is of course appreciated. If not, dislike. Subscribe if you guys are new, and I will see you all in the next video. Until then, take care. Peace.